action.
Hi and welcome to the third episode of Featuring Regular People. This is going to be a different kind of episode, a bit more serious in tone. You might have noticed in the last episode we recorded, Luke wasn't in his normal settings. That's because he's actually over in France at the moment, helping out with the refugee situation in Calais, working for a charity called Care for Calais. So,
Yes, correct.
yeah, the discussion's just going to be a bit about what he's been up to. Luke, I'll let you jump in, mate.
Awesome. First and foremost, obviously, yeah, thanks for coming back. Obviously, please like, subscribe, share, do all of those things that, we obviously need you to do in order to kind of increase, and put the message out there even more, especially for episodes like this, when we're talking on quite deep issues that affect quite literally millions of people all around the world. So yeah, thank you very much for listening to the first couple. And obviously, thank you for coming back to this one as well.
Well, yeah, because as much as we kind of want people to listen to this and laugh at the stupid shit we come out with, episodes like this, there's more of a sense of awareness that we want to be created as well. Because, well, before you got involved with this, Luke, and sort of shared and told me about it, I had no idea the extent of this that was happening. So I think there'll be a lot of people who don't know about it either. So it's probably good to get it out there a bit,
Yeah, absolutely. And also most of the time it's not really people's fault that they're not aware. I just kind of want to say that firstly, because I think in this day and age there is a lot of divide and conquer kind of tactics, especially from like the media, the governments, etc., where we just call people stupid and ignorant, if they don't know something or they've got the opposing opinion, which I think is actually that, well, obviously it does a lot more damage than good because we are more divided than we ever would be, or have been, sorry. But also, it's just through a lack of education, people aren't given the tools to be able to educate themselves on these kind of subjects. A lot of the media reporting is extremely biased, as it is with a lot of things. But also, it's just not reported on at all, the severity and the kind of impact this has on people like me and you. Obviously, to all the people listening as well, it has a huge impact on. But most importantly, obviously, the impact this has on people around the world that are having to flee from that persecution and all of these things that we'll talk about right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the place where I want to get started, Luke, because I think as much as you're going to be telling other people, you're going to be sort of telling me what's going on as well. So first thing I wanted to know is, like, what actually is the situation over there? And a lot of the people seeking asylum in France, like, where have they come from and for what reason?
So they come from a variety of places. Just to go on to this one firstly, the kind of most common nationalities that we see are Sudanese people, people from Eritrea, a lot of Afghanis, Pakistanis, a lot of people from the Middle East. Obviously, the Yemen crisis, for example, is the biggest humanitarian crisis that we've ever known in this world. There are more people fleeing persecution and obviously from the wars that are going on over there than there ever has been in history. So there's quite literally millions of people fleeing from their homes after having lived quite normal lives through no fault of their own. So when they arrive in Calais, it is after an extremely long journey. People walk literally walk in flip-flops. I've seen beaten up, battered shoes, one pair of clothes on the back, one set of clothes on the back. And it's quite literally for like a year and a half at some points, which is terrifying. When we walk down the road to the shops, we often moan. We're popping out to get milk and we can't be bothered. And it really does make you kind of put everything into question. Now at the minute in Calais, there's obviously I couldn't give you factual statistics because obviously it increases and decreases every single day for many, many reasons. But I would say on average there's probably between 800 and 1,000 people at here any given time. Numbers can get as low as like 500, but they are split into a variety of places. So what we used to know as the jungle, that doesn't exist anymore. So the jungle was destroyed a few years ago or a couple of years ago. So now they're unauthorized settlements based around different areas. So they're not legally allowed to be there. And they often, are seen to be evicted every single day.
And the jungle, that was just, so for people that might not know, that was like a massive settlement of refugees, wasn't it? That was like the biggest one.
Yeah, and it was recognised as well, which is I think is probably the most important thing, because they were able to obviously not offer any kind of security in any way, but it was recognised as an official camp. They had the refugees themselves had built churches. They built, they'd had medical facilities in their schools.
It's almost become like more of a society than just people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it kind of just gives people a little bit of, I mean, I don't know if normality makes me sound quite crass.
I was going to say a sense of normality, but it's not even that, is it? It's just some sense of community, like comfort almost, if you could even call it that.
And structure.
Yeah, structure, that's probably a better way to say it.
But I mean, even then, like, it doesn't, yeah, you can't quite quantify the situation or really conceptualize how many people there are, how many families, how many children that are, that are impacted and that are just here, and the conditions are awful.
Yeah.
But obviously, yeah, we'll dive into this a little bit later.
Absolutely. So just with the situation in Calais, how did that first get brought to your attention?
To be honest, obviously we see a lot of stuff over the news, especially kind of pre-Brexit vote. I don't know if you remember that, but there was that campaign that Nigel Farage did with the "Take Back Control" poster, and I think there was a statistic he used that like 800,000 Turkish people were going to suddenly invade Britain.
Yeah.
Or like 8 million or something ridiculous like that. It was
propaganda regarding them hiding like terrorist groups in like refugee camps and stuff as well. Just all that nonsense that you read.
Right. Yeah, and I mean it's one of them. I mean that that kind of poster itself obviously sparked a lot of outrage. It was then discovered that the poster itself was false. So the people in that weren't actually. I don't even think they were Turkish. I'll have to come back and I will post the. Obviously, we can put an asterisk at the bottom, and I'll post the actual fact from where that poster was after the episode, so we can obviously double check and make sure we're putting out the right information. But yeah, it's just mad. So I have been doing a lot of work with charities for the last kind of 7-8 years, as you know. And it's just always been something that I want to step away from the kind of fundraising and go into more of a, I want to be able to directly impact someone's life.
More of like a physical interaction than that. I don't know, like I say, obviously you've done loads of charity work. I briefly worked for a charity a bit in Australia, and the guys running the charity were more than open with the employees about how the money wasn't going where we were telling people it was going. I think I quit after not even my second week, like half of my second week, because quite a lot of these big charities where you sign up and donate and stuff like that, the money doesn't go where you think it's going. So I think doing what you're doing now, and like you said, you're having that personal impact, you're physically there doing it, so you're having a positive impact on somebody.
Yeah, I mean, just to touch on that point as well, now, was it an agency that you'd worked for when in Australia? Was it directly for a charity?
It's directly for a charity.
Directly,
well,
yeah.
It wasn't like a massive charity. It wasn't like UNICEF or anything like that. I can't think of what they were called now, but
yeah, I mean, I don't know what the regulations are in Australia, but I know that obviously in the UK they have to report everything to the Financial Conduct Authority, the FCA, and those stats get published every single year. So whilst I'm not going to sit here and say that charities are the holy grail of the world, because they're obviously very far from it, as we all know, I think the kind of vast amounts of sums that go to certain people can also be justified in certain extents. But perhaps we should come back to this on another episode. Otherwise, I could talk all day about that.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Well, I guess that kind of leads into my next question, which is what made you want to get involved and help out? But was it having that sort of physical impact, like being there?
Yes, yeah, and no. I mean, there's a couple of selfish reasons. I will start off with those because obviously I'd like to be as transparent as possible. But the first selfish reason is that this is the kind of job that I want to go into after I've studied. And for anybody looking at this video now going, this guy's way too old to study, I am technically a mature student, so I'll just let you all know I'm not like, Benjamin Button. So yeah, this is the kind of work that I want to go into. So obviously this looks good on my CV. So that's the first selfish reason. The second selfish reason, which I guess is kind of not selfish at the same time, is that I think I'm quite opinionated, and I think I need to be able to back up my opinions with, first-hand experience and facts. So it's partly a research finding mission. So obviously I can help educate people, or if I'm in a debate in regards to this kind of situation, I know exactly what's going on. So it might just be because I'm quiet.
I respect that.
Yeah.
First of all, there aren't many people who would openly admit that they have selfish reasons for doing that sort of thing. Quite a lot of people like to Mother Teresa it and be like, oh, I was just born to help people, I love helping, which to a certain extent that may be true, but also there aren't many people who know they're opinionated and want to back up their opinions with facts.
I think it's important
loudly so that people think it's true.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important in this day and age when there's, this kind of huge spread of disinformation, and
fake news
obviously people like Donald Trump that obviously just spout bullshit time after time, and there's like 75 million people in the US that actually agree with him.
Yeah, scary part, mate.
But then the just to touch on this one, the unselfish reasons are obviously, I think that it's our duty as people who are lucky enough to be born with the lottery, of the location, essentially. We're lucky enough to be born in the UK, where since post-war, post 1946, we have lived very good and comfortable lives.
Yeah.
And we're born into a sea of opportunity and a sea of wealth in terms of having the NHS, for example. Getting free education.
Not for much longer.
Well, yeah, maybe not, but that's another subject entirely.
For another
Absolutely. But I think it's just, our duty as people to give what we can, and to make sure that those who are obviously aren't as fortunate as us, or have been as fortunate as what at one point in time, get the support they need. Because if I was down and out, and I have been very much down and out on a few occasions, I've always had people to lift me back up, and I need to be able to reciprocate that on a wider scale.
Makes loads of sense, mate. That's a really, really good answer. So more moving on to just the kind of what the experience has been like so far. How long have you been out there now?
What day is it today? Sunday. Days don't exist. I think that was a running theme from last episode as well.
Yeah, days are
gone. So I've been out here a week and 1 day. So I've been officially working with the charity for a week, because obviously the first day was just arriving and traveling, etc. So yeah, I've done 7 days of voluntary work so far, and I will be out here for another between 3 and 6 weeks more.
Okay. And what's the day-to-day been like? Like, describe your average day almost.
So I wake up and have 2 cups of coffee. That's standard. Otherwise, unless I've done that, I physically cannot talk to people. And I will touch on why I've said that in a minute. But so we go down to the warehouse. They have a huge warehouse which has quite literally thousands of tents in, which I've had the pleasure of sorting for 4 days out of my 7, which is a horrific task. But it also, so yeah, we go in, do various bits in the warehouse, organise donations, sort stuff out for distribution that day. Have a lovely lunch, which is usually cooked by, it's always cooked by the volunteers, and it's beautiful food. But also, well, I say beautiful, it's mostly leftovers and bits that are mixed match and rah, 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 but they make it really good somehow. And then after lunch, it's distribution. So we will go to one of the unauthorized settlements around Calais or Dunkirk, and basically we'll take like charging boards so people can charge their phones, so they can obviously contact their friends and their family, lawyers if they need to. We take barbering stuff as well, so the refugees can obviously cut each other's hair, which may sound silly to some, but during lockdown especially, a lot of our kind of, you know, looking after ourselves and kind of keeping fresh and fit and healthy has been a huge thing. And I think it's obviously really important for somebody's dignity when they're able to have that sense of identity. We take some sports equipment, so a couple of footballs, some cricket stuff, volleyballs, whatever. Again, it's just a mental health thing, physical health as well, obviously. But then also we take various items, so coats, shoes, snug packs, which are like scarves, hats, socks, blankets, tents, sleeping bags, basically anything that, you know, people might need.
Yeah.
So for example, yesterday we distributed brand new, well, £5,000 worth of brand new coats. I mean, it was sub-zero temperatures yesterday. It was like -4, snowing, pissing with rain, and you're living in a grassy field with nothing else on your back. So it's stuff that's, you know, absolutely vital to ensure that people survive.
Yeah, and I think like you were saying about the barbering equipment and the stuff like that, I think it's important to pay mind to those sorts of things, because like when you're in the mindset of just having to survive almost, it's probably quite easy to ignore those other facets of life that are so important to, you know, like everyone else. Like,
Yeah, of
so
course.
for example, like you're saying about lockdown, quite a lot of people in the first lockdown in this country couldn't get a haircut for however many weeks, couple of months, and it was the end of the world to quite a lot of people. You got like some of the people in the situation that you've obviously been describing, their first haircut for, I imagine, 6 months to a year for quite a few of them, and it's like what that can do for your mental health, like you were saying, is probably really understated.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to kind of give you another example to relate this more to people in the UK as well, is that so when somebody's going through leukemia treatment, obviously they lose their hair, they lose their eyebrows. So what a lot of cancer charities, like Macmillan, for example, will do is they will have hairdressers that will come and fit wigs. They'll do their the makeup for them, you know, and they'll groom them just to make sure that they feel confident about themselves. We all know that obviously if you have a healthy attitude and a positive mindset, it really does kind of spur on your body reacting to that, and that your physical health can improve as well. So I just thought that was a good way to kind of correlate between the two, and obviously, you know, give it some importance, because some people will listen to this and they will be like, what the fuck did I need haircuts for?
Yeah, yeah.
And it's just important to kind of try and relate it to, you know, to somebody, to obviously a bigger issue in the UK.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and yeah, I mean, it's just, you know, being able to look in the mirror. I mean, we all do it. I look in the mirror most days and I'm like, what on earth is that?
Mate, don't.
Especially at the minute.
I've put a little bit of weight on at the minute. I'm getting chunky.
Well, this is it. And we all have this self-conscious, you know, mindset. And I think it's really important that if somebody can look in the mirror after the kind of journey that they've gone through so far, and just remind themselves of who they are, then it's going to spur them on for the next part of that
Yeah.
journey, regardless of who you are in the world.
Mm. So on that note, kind of like, what is the general attitude around Calais toward the refugees, like the locals and stuff?
It's a difficult question, mate. I would say mostly hostile.
Mm.
Um, there's yeah, it's a very difficult one. There are, and I wouldn't like to obviously shame everybody or tie everybody with the same brush,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
I mean there are a lot of locals in Calais, French locals, which are amazing. I mean the person that's hosting me at the moment, she is heavily involved, or has been heavily involved with the charity. her daughter, who I met today, is heavily involved with another organisation. And there's various other people that I know. So there are a lot of French locals, which are great. However, because of the kind of media and political narrative that there are a hell of a lot of people who are quite hostile. And especially when you see, so there's, I don't know if you want to come on to this later on in more detail, but there is a subsection of the police called the CRS. Now, I'm not quite sure what that stands for, as in an acronym. However, I will find out, and we can add that onto the information section at the end if you want. But essentially, they are a police service set up just for refugees.
Wow.
So they will daily go and evict people. And when I say evict, that's a very nice terminology. They'll slash up their tents. They'll take their sleeping bags. They'll take their clothes. And essentially just destroy everything that the charities have helped to provide for people to keep them alive.
Yeah. Well, see, this might be what can be considered quite a naive mindset, but any new sort of faction of the police is going to require some level of funding. So like in instances like this, my brain always goes, so all that money you're spending on this new division of the police to go and fuck up refugee camps, what if you put that money into helping the refugees? But obviously that's why I'm probably not in charge of running a country. Do you know what I mean? Because it's not the mindset that gets you to that position. But I imagine, obviously, it's not as simple as that. But I'm just saying that's the kind of thought process that I have when I hear about things like that. And it's like things like that are what I find really kind of disheartening in the world. This is getting a bit broad now, but so I'd compare it to, how there's the government spend money on anti-homelessness, like architecture, like them spikes in doorways and stuff, so that it's you can sleep there. Like, it's spending money and going out of your way to make somebody's life, which is already horrendous, more difficult. And it just seems so, I can't think of the word I'm looking for, but like
fucking disgusting.
Yeah, fucking disgusting, mate, obviously. But unhumanitarian almost.
Inhumane, yeah.
Inhumane. They're inhumane. That's exactly what I was fucking looking for.
This is why I do the writing, isn't it?
Yeah,
for anybody that doesn't understand that, Khan focuses on the editing, because obviously I'd be a fucking bull in the china shop. And yeah, anyway, so that doesn't really matter.
If you're the brand.
No, definitely not. However, just to kind of touch on the money side of it, so there's a couple of points that I want to say. Firstly, the biggest one is that your taxpayer money goes into this. Our taxpayer money as Brits go into this, even though we are now officially not part of the EU. If anything, since then, we've actually injected more money into the French authorities and the French government in order to tackle this issue. I'd like to say tackle this issue in asterisks, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I think it shouldn't be an issue. But it's a scary thing, isn't it? Because we're injecting millions and millions of pounds into another government when really we could be spending that money, especially at the moment, on things like our NHS, giving other key workers a pay rise, making sure people in social care, the NHS, nurses, doctors, they have, support for their mental health as well, like we've seen all over the news recently. And the money that's being spent is mostly used, and I learned this today. Well, I heard this point today, actually, which I thought was really interesting, is that it's being spent to make sure that the refugees stay tired. It's making sure that they're run down, so they know, so they don't have any kind of structure or sense of normality in their lives. And it's a deterrent method, to make sure that people are so run down that they know, for one, that they're not welcome, and for two, that they have to have all this pressure, and they're going to have to build, they're going to have to just get used to it, essentially, or stay away.
Yeah.
It's like you were just saying about the homelessness spikes, for example. That's the same method, it's just to keep people awake and to keep people stressed and tired. And homelessness and the refugee crisis are quite hand in hand.
Yeah,
You
absolutely.
know, especially when you go into things like suicide rates, which have spiked. The average life expectancy of refugees and homelessness people drops by, at least a dozen years, if not 20, 30 years in some cases. And it's a scary thing, because really all you'd have to do is inject that money into education, inject it into getting people's asylum claims processed, so then they can obviously get into work, they can become a beneficiary to the UK, as opposed to, draining taxpayer money on being held up in hotels which our government pay for, detention centres, which some of the most disgusting places in the UK at the moment. Um, and the money could be spent on kind of just, actually trying to help them integrate into our society. Now, I know that we're going to touch on this in a bit, I think, anyway, but um, I want to touch on this now, actually. I did a
Yeah,
survey
sure.
yesterday, and one of the questions on the survey was, why do you want to go to the UK? Now, the biggest answer, like we were discussing before, is that people have got family and friends. However, the second most commonly answered given answer was that they like the UK culture. They all have a football team that they like.
Mm.
I've had to argue with many refugees on their football team choice. It's usually one of the London teams or Manchester United.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, there's not many Southampton fans out there, which is a shame.
They don't love Ings, no?
Yeah, they haven't heard of Danny Ings yet, mate. I
Fuck.
will educate them while I'm here, though.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
they love music culture. They love anything to do with London.
Mm.
Um, it's somewhere they see as still being quite fair to refugees,
Mm.
and they think that they have their refugee rights at heart, which obviously we don't. But yeah, and it's quite scary to think that these people all they want is to come over to work, to benefit the society, to have some sort of safety, but also just to probably go to a football match and
Yeah.
enjoy life like they would back home.
Fucking hell, mate. Yeah, it's like, if like the day-to-day life we live, that we're probably, well, I know I for a fact take my life for granted on more than one occasion, but
Mm.
they would do literally anything to have even a small part of that. Do you know what I mean? I think there's something about considering the situation that other people are in, which I don't think is done enough in society. It's far too easy to think negatively about your situation without considering what's going on
Well,
elsewhere.
it's also quite hard to imagine things that are outside of your own front door and you're in a circle.
Mm.
Everything these days is about looking after you and looking after your family.
Particularly with COVID, that's never been more
Yeah,
the narrative than COVID. It's, you've got to look, especially because people are losing their jobs left, right, and centre. Like, the narrative has never been more about taking care of yourself and your own.
no, and it's one that I massively respect, and I think it is very important. And there is an old Bible saying which I wanna dive into. Kind of relates to this, but um, now I might misquote this a little. I haven't heard this in a long time, but basically, it says that charity starts at home.
Mm.
Which was wrongly used on, I think it was BBC Radio 1 or the BBC a few years ago when we were talking about charities in the UK. However, what that person didn't quote was that there's a comma after the home, and it says, and then begins elsewhere.
Mm.
And what that meant, that whole passage, was basically that if you have a roof over your head, food in your belly, and shoes on your feet, clothes on your back, you're in a position to be able to give. And that's something that a lot of people when I worked in charity would say to me. They'd say, "Oh, charity begins at home, mate." And I'm like, "But do you actually know the context of the rest of that quote?"
Yeah.
And it's, that goes back to me being hot-headed and opinionated. I actually read, um, I think about 100 pages of the Bible just to find that specific
Jeez.
quote.
Persistent.
But all of the refugees that we're supporting have all lived normal lives like us. It's just an unfortunate turn of events that are completely out of their control that put them in this situation. So when we talk about we and them, there's not really much that's different. I think I have more in common with a refugee than I do those people that that I read about on the news, the ones in power in our government.
Yeah, absolutely. Something I was reading today said something along those lines as well. It's like, if the people in more fortunate positions knew just how similar some refugees' lives were before they were a refugee, they would have a far more empathetic view of the situation.
Yeah,
Like, a lot of the people like seeking asylum, like I read a few stories about, like, there was a young lad, 16, he was fucking kayaking to the UK, which is, you'll probably know more than me, is quite a common thing, because it's like a 20-mile trip from Calais to the UK. So kayaking is something that quite a lot of them try. And basically, this lad got rescued because he'd nearly died fucking trying it. And
yeah,
the reason he was fleeing his country is because his whole family were killed by the Taliban. Because one day the
yeah.
Taliban decided to move into his village. Before that, he was living a very normal life with his family. And one day
Very
people
middle
turned up and
class.
fucking killed everyone. Like,
Yeah.
it's so hard to imagine that happening where you live now, because you're not in a war-torn country. But that is an all too real reality for some people.
Yeah, and I mean, firstly, I'd like to just point out that we were a war-torn country less than 100 years ago.
Hmm.
It's a very, very scary thing to think that we've forgotten so quickly about all the negative impacts that the war had on us.
Yeah.
We kind of touch on, it's Great Britain, it's this, it's that. But actually, like we were talking about earlier, there was thousands of English children that had to move away and flee their homes.
Well, mate, so this is,
Um,
I did want to jump into this at some point, but we might as well just go into it now. Like,
well, before we do, there's just a couple of other little bits just from that last part there that I want to talk about. So, um, kayaking probably makes it sound quite cozy and nice.
oh yeah,
Um, it's not you've got little dinghy boats that are squished together with men, women, children that probably have the capacity for like 6 people.
mm,
They since Brexit, the UK are trying to contravene maritime law, which states that if you're found in that country's waters, you should be taken to safety at the closest coast,
mm,
which the UK under Priti Patel's Home Office actually breaking that law, and it's something that we're looking into quite a lot at the moment.
mm.
But basically, they're picking people up in English waters who are, on the verge of drowning, and they're taking them back to France, which is breaking, maritime law.
Well, I think everyone will have seen, it must have been about 6 or so months ago now, when there was literally about 30 or 40 refugees on a tiny little dinghy trying to get into the UK, and the fucking BBC had a boat pull up next to them, and someone was fucking leaning off the side of the boat. Where have you come from? Are you all
Yeah,
okay? It's like, what the fuck are you actually doing? Like,
yeah,
see, that's where I really struggle, because, for example, at one point I was looking to work in the media industry. There are people I went to uni with who work for the BBC now, and
yeah.
like, the cameraman on that news crew, like, if that was me, I'd want to be like, what the fuck are we doing? Like, why are we trying to interview these fucking people? Why aren't we helping? Like, it's just a mindset that I can't get my head round at all. Like, it's
No.
baffling.
Um, and that just to point out as well, like the BBC is meant to be one of the kind of most unbiased and factual news reporting agencies in the world. I think it's actually in the top 10. And to think that somebody, an organization, or like they call themselves, a corporation, um, who prides themselves on this kind of unbiased factual kind of evidence-based journalism, is then doing something that's so inhumane and far from reality is quite shocking.
Yeah.
There's a lot of media attention on the BBC at the moment, mostly from people on who lean right and far right, about how bad the publishing is towards the left. But
Mm.
that's also not that's not a very humane thing to do. Um, and there was an earlier point as well. Sorry, as well. you know, you were talking about the kids, the child refugees. You know, there are plenty of kids that I've met over the past kind of week, um, because they are people that don't often get a lot of media portrayal.
Mm.
You know, the media often don't report about children, until one of them obviously washes up dead on our shore.
Well, there's that very famous photo, wasn't there?
Yeah, it was, and it was disgusting. But there was a survey that I did yesterday, which was with a 16-year-old kid,
Mm.
and bearing in mind he was from Sudan. He had been walking and traveling for you know, the best part of a year, probably a year and a half.
Mm.
And when we asked him why he wanted to come to the UK, he just wrote football. He's like, I want to play football. Um, and I'm like, how has somebody who has experienced so much pain in their life still got so much optimism? And
Mm.
you know, they're some of the most resilient people that I've ever met.
Yeah.
You know, hopes and dreams really do take you places. And there isn't a day when, you know, you don't hear a beautiful story like that, alongside obviously a lot of the pain.
Mm.
um but yeah, I just thought I'd add that out there.
Yeah, no, definitely, man. And what you were saying about them being the most resilient people you've ever met, I was going to say, like, the never mind the physical aspect, the amount of mental strength it must require to have been what they've been through, and then despite the ridiculous amounts of adversity they face, still trying to fucking crack on and get to where they want to be. Do you know what I mean? And
Yeah, and it's not even like they're trying to get here. For a lot of people say economic migrants. And there was a perfect example of this that kind of sets the tone really yesterday, is that one guy said he'd actually already been in the UK. He was scammed out of £5,000, which was obviously his savings that he had back home,
mm,
in order to kind of get his life together. Um, he was scammed out of that money by a partner that he'd met, who then called the police and said that he was beating her up, and the police then obviously deported him. And he just said, "Look, I'm heartbroken." He was like, "I've been heartbroken ever since, and I come to the UK because I want life and I want happiness, and that's more important than money."
mm,
And it's something that a lot of people forget. You know, in a time where we're just preaching about mental health and happiness, and you know, just living your best life, essentially, that very cliche term. And that's, you know, that's what people from every country want to do.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess this perfectly leads into what I wanted to ask you, mate, which is what kind of impact do you think the experience is having on you already in the short time that you've been there?
Um, to be quite blunt, it's day to day. You know, it's very much, and that's the situation here all over. It changes every single day. It varies all the time. You know, there was a few nights ago that I came home and just cried for an hour,
Mm,
because of the stuff that I'd seen that day. And it was, yeah, it was heartbreaking. But then yesterday, for example, even though it was snowing, you know, the mud was just incredibly deep, and it was raining and it was sub-zero temperatures. Like, people were still happy to talk and open up, and you know, you could just sit and have a cup of tea with somebody, and it was just like, you know, it was just so kind of heartwarming. So it's a real big mixture of the two. um, it's definitely something that kind of makes me realize and makes me think, you know, when I come back, and I, you know, grab a shower, and then I sit in front of the fire, and I'm like, wow, like, you know, this is second nature to
yeah,
most people. um, you know, and people that are living in poverty, whether that's in the UK or overseas or in Calais. um, it's something that's so far from reality, and it makes you really think.
yeah. Well, you say like people are happy to talk in that regardless of the circumstance. Like, have you had any particular interactions that have really like stuck with you, or is it just the whole experience?
I think the biggest interaction, the two actually, I think the biggest interaction was on my first day. So we were at one of the sites. I'm not going to say the names of them, just because, for obviously for people's safety.
Mm,
Um, but we were at one of the sites, and all I did for an hour and a half, I was on games that day, and all I did was just play football with about 12 guys. We didn't understand each other. I don't speak Arabic or anything, and they obviously didn't speak very good English. Well, some do, some don't. Um, but we didn't really need to language didn't really become a barrier. You know, we were laughing, we were playing games. You know, I was nutmegged on many occasion, and it was just something that kind of makes you realize that actually there's so many things we have in common. There's so many other ways we can communicate with people when language is an issue. And the reason I think that was so important is because I think that we're scared of the unknown, and that's where a lot of this fear in the UK comes from when people are you know, obviously attempting to get over here.
Mm.
And it's because they don't understand the culture, they don't understand the language, and that seems alien to them, so they get scared and fearful, which is a natural fight or flight reaction. um, but there are so many things that we have in common. You know, people dance, people sing, we play football, we'll play cricket, um, and these are all things that are second nature to us at home.
Mm.
um, so if there's one thing that I'd like people to take away from this, is the fact that it's not hard to connect with somebody that you don't understand. And after you have realized that, you'll find that you understand them a lot more.
Mm.
The second interaction I think that stands out really well is I was at another site, and I literally just spent the afternoon playing, well, basically catch with this like seven, he might have been seven, he might have been six, 6-year-old kid. And at the end, we gave him a few sweets, and he was like, "Oh, mister, can I have one more?" Sister. And I was just like, "Do you know what? That's so sweet." So I gave him another one. I was like, "You promise you'll give that to your sister?" He was like, "Yes, yes, yes." And then his sister popped round the corner, and he ran and gave her the sweet. And then at the end of the day, they helped carry the bags, like the bag of balls. Not that I obviously asked him to or needed it, but um,
Fucking
but
pick them up.
yeah, I was like, "Go on, you can take that now." But no, like, you know, they just picked them up, and so we held like one of the handles each. The little girl washed off because it was super muddy. She washed the ball and the cricket bats and stuff like that. And I was like, "You don't need to do any of this. Like, I'm gonna do it when I get back to the warehouse anyway." But the
Mm.
fact that they just did it, and they were so generous. I mean, I offered to give them one of the balls so they could play with. And they said no. They were like, you keep, and then just, you know, we'll see you next time. And I just thought, you know, how incredibly sweet. I mean, that's what most children are like. You know, just incredibly sweet and honest, and yeah, just optimistic.
Yeah. No, that's really nice, man. That's really nice. That him taking that other sweet to give to his sister is such like just a nice example of doing something for someone else, even on such a
Yeah,
minor level. Like, mate, when you're a little kid, you want to eat all the sweets, but even in the situation he's in, he's thinking about giving one to his sister. So,
yeah, it's amazing, really. You know, there's so much heart and generosity when you have so little. And that's in the UK as well. You know, it's all over the world that people that have the least are the ones that tend to give more.
yeah, and I think that in terms of a mental health context, it's always the people who seem to be going through the hardest times are there to help others that need it, because
Yeah, for
you're
sure.
familiar with that experience yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we could dive into this on another day. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's something that we're both, you know, fully aware of.
Well
Like,
versed.
you know.
But yeah, that kind of leads on to another discussion I wanted to have, just with regard to like the view of refugees in this country and the kind of mentality around asylum seekers in the UK in general, because I'm sure you'll agree it's a largely negative one, and it comes from, like we've said before, like fear mongering and a fear of the unknown.
Yeah,
And I obviously, like, as we've said, like, I just think it's important that if you're in a fortunate position, you kind of have a duty to educate yourself on the situations that less fortunate people find themselves in. And even just to understand on a base level, you don't necessarily even have to do anything to go out of your way to help, but just so that you're aware that there are things like this going on in the world. And I kind of, you have more experience of it than me. I wanted to ask you, like, why you thought the attitude toward asylum seekers in the UK is such an unempathetic one.
Um, so, I mean, it's half and half, really. Now, I think that the media perpetuates a mostly negative portrayal of refugees and asylum seekers. And I think they purely do that to obviously sell stories. But I think when you actually dive into it in a bit more of a community aspect and a public aspect, there are a lot of people, there are thousands and millions of people out there who donate money, who donate their time, who will donate their old stuff like their clothes, or they'll go and buy new stuff to give. The warehouse I'm working in the mornings is a prime example of that. It's two big warehouses and it's full to the brim of donations. And people leave little notes in there, to wish the refugees well, and to hope that they arrive safely, and to hope that they can find, some happiness and love again in their life. And that's something that we come across daily. Is these beautiful little notes in the donations that they've given, and it's just, it is a reminder that there are still millions of good people out there, despite how shit the world may seem at the moment. But yeah, the kind of I think it's becoming more of a majority of negative influence that the media are having on the general public's perception of this crisis. I think it stems purely from the kind of nationalism and populist movements that we're seeing in the UK's politics at the moment. It also, this is a theory that I've kind of been thinking about a lot recently, and it kind of stems across a lot of borders, not just the refugee crisis, but in the terms of the overall racism that we're seeing here in the UK and all over the world, is that traditionally the white working middle class, white working class of the country, the population was able to work, to do things, and especially up north and in the Midlands, ever since the Thatcher government, led to a lot of poverty, and that whole white working class has been slowly forgotten about, and slowly, kind of detached from the rest of the country. Although they, have very similar kind of living situations as what, people from BAME backgrounds do, or refugees and asylum seekers do. And that gets forgotten about, and people, when they feel forgotten about, they revolt and they attach themselves to a narrative in order to get the attention that they want, or what they deserve. And obviously, yeah, it plays into that. Right, well, this is really bad because these people are getting better treatment than I am.
That is a massive thing in this country as well. Like, generally, a very sort of right-wing, uneducated opinion is that anyone from any country can just come over here. You hear it all the time, mate. Oh, they can just get a council house. They move all their family in. Like, I literally can count endlessly about how many people I've heard come out with something along those lines. And it's just like the misinformation that gets spread. And like you say, mate, angry people who feel let down and are looking for something to be passionate about, they will kind of latch on to things. And I think Tommy Robinson plays a massive part, because there's quite a lot of young lads who, for whatever reason, see him as some sort of role model and think one of those sort of like man of the people, stands up for what we believe in kind of blokes. And his sort of everyman persona fuels a lot of like racism in younger groups of men in particular, I find.
Yeah, I mean, it's a complete indoctrination, but just to kind of rephrase what you said then, who feel like they've been let down. Now, they absolutely have been let down.
Yeah.
Now, I know that that's obviously what you meant.
But yeah, people that they're angry at is my point.
Yes, absolutely. It's purely just the politicians that abuse this country and have abused this country for the past 12 years. Now, I will go back and say a little further than the 12 years, because I think that the government beforehand was just as shit. But especially over the last 12 years, where we've had this decade of austerity, and now obviously we're facing the biggest financial crisis that we've probably seen since the war, if not maybe more than the war. But just to kind of outlay the first few years of the asylum process very quickly, is that people arrive in the UK, They have all their stuff taken off them, phones, any documents that they may have, probably none. But yeah, everything taken off them. They're then shipped to detention centres, which is where we're seeing all the COVID outbreaks at the moment, and the hunger strikes, and the sleeping strikes, etc., etc. They then, after that, move to a hotel whilst they wait for their asylum process to be either accepted or denied. When I say hotel, I mean a single bed in a shitty hotel, which is yeah, often damp, often, you know, dark. They're obviously isolated to their bedrooms, which are no bigger than, well, I mean, a single bed and, you know, a
Essentially,
desk or something.
glorified solitary confinement.
Yeah, essentially, yeah, exactly that. I mean, I've done a lot of voluntary work in the UK in these hotels, and they're not the best conditions. The staff in them were, what I witnessed, were lovely, but yeah, they're not the best conditions in the hotels because obviously the government aren't going to spend out money on good stuff, but a lot of people think that they do. They will then wait for their asylum process to be claimed, which can take up to 3 years, sometimes longer, but the majority are up to 3 years. Um, and in that time, they're given about £8 a week, which, I mean, I know that they're fed, so obviously their food and accommodation are covered. But I mean, £8 a week is, well, £8 is like my daily coffee budget, if that.
You'd spend that by accident if you just pop into a shop. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
£8 to the average person is not even noteworthy. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I mean, it barely makes up a note, does it? So, you know, when people talk about economic migrants and they're coming over here to steal our jobs or just because they want to sponge off the government, I'd like to ask those people that what they could do with £8.
Mm.
And also, I'd like to say is that a lot of the refugees that get this far are the wealthier ones. You know, these are the ones that have been able to afford to pay the people smugglers, to pay to get people to help the transport across to the UK and across to France. The people that are coming from the really impoverished backgrounds are the one that are still living in the surrounding countries to where they're fleeing from. So if you think about places, across that way, I think it was Jordan that lets in millions and millions of refugees, and they're the ones that can't afford to get here. So they have come from very middle and upper class um, backgrounds. You know, often they are the wealthier people with the better professions, like the doctors, the lawyers, the teachers, um, the therapists, etc., etc. Um, so I don't think economic migrant is a very, very good terminology to use, and I think it's one that actually, on the most part, is quite false. Especially if you're going to live off £8 a week for 3 fucking years, you know.
Yeah, but it just helps perpetuate that narrative, doesn't it? That they're coming
Absolutely.
to fucking steal our jobs, steal our money, etc. You know,
Yeah.
that whole generation of proud to be British, I'm proud to be for this is Great Britain. Like, a lot of people that come out with that, they don't know what they're proud of. If you were to push them one question further and be like, so what about British history are you particularly proud of? I guarantee 90% of them would not have an answer for you.
Probably not.
No.
Which is, it's sad and it's a shame because they're people of the UK and other Western countries, and well, every country really, deserve to kind of know a little bit more about the world.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
there's only the government and the media, the curriculum in schools, for example, to blame.
So I remember when I first got to an age where I became interested in looking into British history, and
Mm.
I'm not surprised they don't teach you it in school, because you're not going to be taught about all the bad things your country have done. But a 5-minute internet search on British history, you'll uncover a lot of dark shit that you were not aware of before. Like, it's worrying. And obviously there's British museums full of not very British artifacts.
Well, yeah, and I mean, we live on a cuisine that isn't very British. We
Right,
speak.
I love that meme where it's like he gets a Turkish kebab, gets in his German car, drives to an Italian restaurant, all the while ranting about how he hates foreigners. Like, there's way more to it than that, but that's like the base.
Yeah.
Like the general ignorance in this country.
But I mean, you know, a lot of things that we also learn in school come from places like the Middle East, like algebra, for example. You know, Akala does a huge talk on this, and in his latest book, Natives, it's an incredible read for anybody out there that wants to kind of brush up on British history and how it kind of affects today. I would definitely recommend that book. But you know, we have adopted so many things from all over the world. You know, our alphabet, our language that we speak. You know, the kind of numerical system that we use. And it's crazy to think that we have such a anti-foreign policy, and we have such a proudness of our own history and our own culture, but our own history and our own culture don't belong to us. I mean, just to give you an example of this, I mean, we met in Australia, like we mentioned in the first episode, and you know, I don't know if you ever experienced it, but I got called a pommy a lot. And mostly it was just like fun and games, but also a lot of people said it in, or they intended to say it in like quite a derogatory way. For anybody that doesn't understand what a pommy is a prisoner of Her Majesty. But essentially, when Australia was founded, well, white Australia was founded, Australia as we know it, it was a bunch of UK prisoners being sent over. Now, the most popular and the most well-behaved of those prisoners then became the police officers, and then they also became the people in power.
So mental to think about, isn't it?
It's crazy, which is, you know, I think why they have such deep-rooted racism, because it's obviously that they're only a few generations on, and it wasn't until, now I might be wrong on the exact date, but it was 1967 / mid 1960s that Aboriginal people were then legally classed as people, whereas before that they were classed as flora and fauna. So you could legally go out and hunt them. And this all stems from British colonialism.
1967, mate.
Yeah.
And that's not now, because we've ran on quite a lot already, but I think at some point I'd love to have a discussion about the Aboriginal situation in Australia, because the people sent over there by the British really went and fucked up their culture, essentially.
So, yeah, there's a lot of stuff, you know, like the stolen generation. But yeah, we'll dive into this at a later episode.
Right, yeah. I feel like we kind of went off on a couple tangents there. That was always going to happen. But just to kind of round this one off, obviously
bring it back a little.
things we were just kind of touching on, we will go into in future episodes. Like, we'll kind of break the episodes up every now and again with a bit more of a serious subject. But just with regard to what we've been talking about, mate, so how can people who have kind of heard what you've said about the Calais situation, how can they get involved and help out, and why is that particular cause like so important?
That's a great question, to be honest, mate. It's a lot easier than what most people think. I think all it takes is, for the people that aren't so open-minded, I think it just takes a little bit of reading, you know, just looking at a couple of articles and reading about the factual stuff, as opposed to obviously the more right-leaning stuff. Not that there's anything wrong with mildly right-leaning politics, but obviously the far-right stuff doesn't perpetuate that. However, I'm going off on another tangent there. But I think all it takes is for people just to kind of open their eyes a little bit more, do a little bit of research. It doesn't have to be hours of academic report reading, you know, just looking at some of the charity pages, looking at some of the stories that refugees will write, and just sharing a post, liking a page, donating £1. If you can't donate £1, then share it. You know, educate yourself, tell your family, educate your friends, and go and volunteer for an hour a week, or go and speak to volunteers that work for these types of charities, you know, just to kind of open up and have a new kind of outlook on life. Because one, it's important for you. It's not you personally, Khan. I mean, for people listening, it's important for them because it's easier to to hate someone than to love someone. But I think loving somebody, and especially people that you don't know, it just is going to be so much better for your own mental and physical health and your own outlook on life, and you'll see a lot more positive in the world. And not everything is all sunshine and rainbows or whatever the saying is, but it can be a lot better if you just embrace what's going on. There's so much more that can be done than that. I mean, if people want to take that to the next kind of level, they can message us. I'm happy to talk to anybody about that. And if you message the Instagram page or anything on social media, then obviously I'm happy to have as many discussions and answer as many questions as you might want to. But yeah, I think all it takes is just for people to just to open up their mind a little bit, and just to reach out. And like with any subject that you don't know, you have to start somewhere. So as I said at the start of the episode, it's not our fault that we're not educated on this, but it is our fault if we don't take it upon ourselves to have that responsibility of educating ourselves. The reason why I think it's such an important cause, there's many causes. Pardon?
I said, see the last hour of conversation.
Yeah. I mean, apart from that, though, just to kind of summarize it, in case you just want to skip to the end, I know a couple of people that do that, and it's quite weird. But it's important to me because one, there is so much politics involved, and the politics is set in a really destructive way. It's set in a really redundant way. Like the deterrent methods of the UK and the French governments, for example, are completely pointless. Education, inspiration, and integration. These are all things that we should be doing, because then the crisis would actually get a lot worse. A lot better. The crisis would get a lot better. But I also think it's really important because people are human, everybody's a human. We are meant to preach this kind of, we're all the human race, we're all one human race, which is a lot of what far right people, and a lot of what far right people will say is that we're all one human race and all lives matter. Well, if that's the case, and if all lives matter, why doesn't a refugee's life matter? Why don't their children's lives matter?
It's because there's a silent white in that saying, bro.
Well, yeah, there is, but I don't, I would like to just challenge people a little bit on their ignorance, because if you're going to say all lives matter, then practice what you preach, innit?
Yeah, because I think we live in a time where there's no excuse for ignorance to a certain extent. It's never, like, information has never been more readily accessible than it is now. So,
well, we live in the information age, don't we? Or disinformation age, depending on who you are. But yeah.
But yeah, man, I think that rounds it off really nicely. Like I've literally learnt loads from what you've just talked about there, despite the bit of research I've done myself. And I hope anyone that does listen to this can definitely take something away from it.
Of course. Just before obviously we wrap up, I'd like to say a huge thanks to Care for Calais, a huge thanks to other organisations as well, such as like Refugee Community Kitchen, Refugee Mobile Support, Care. There are so many good organisations out here, which mostly like 99% volunteers. And if anybody has been inspired, has some time on their hands, there are a lot of community groups in the UK. For example, Care for Calais has tons and tons of community groups that will go out and help the refugees in the UK, or the asylum seekers, sorry. And I think it's really easy for people to get involved if they don't have the time, like a lot of us, a lot of people don't. Then donate some money if you're able to afford to do that, or when you're able to afford to do that. That's it's always going to be needed. And these charities are purely only able to happen because of the volunteers that work for them. And I've met some really incredible people so far. So yeah, I'd just like to obviously say thanks to all of those as well.
We will drop links for all this stuff in the description as well. Like, if you want to get any more information on the situation, or like donate anything like that, there will be links in the bottom. So yeah, mate, for me, that's I'm happy to wrap it up there.
Awesome. All right. Thank you very much, bro. And everybody like, share, subscribe, and thanks for tuning in again. And we'll see you soon.